talk about that in a second. Just by way of background, I'm a psychiatrist by training. I've always had an interest in sort of mind-body interaction and what is the mind, and thought that psychiatry would be the best venue for combining science with that interest. And I've learned some important things along the way, but as you may know, psychiatry's gotten very focused on molecules and drugs and neurotransmitters and things that are important, but that are very narrow focus. So over the years, I've also had this exploratory interest, I guess you could say. And it started with learning how to meditate just before medical school as a stress management technique. Any people who are considering medical school might want to pick up something along the way. But it turned out to also be, well, almost like a gateway experience, because once you start realizing that you can manipulate your consciousness intentionally, it just opens the door to a lot of different types of experiences. Physiologic, psychological, and spiritual. So it's been a good way to bridge the dimensions, if you will. I've been fortunate enough to train with people who are skilled in what they call energy work, and it centers around the idea that there's an invisible energy that animates human beings and living systems. It's not anything I learned about at all in medical school, and there may be some mention of it nowadays, but so I'll talk a little bit about that whole tradition and the idea of invisible energy. But what really led to my current project and being here is the fact, well, two strands together. One is I grew up in the Boston area, so I'm somewhat of a sports fan, so I followed teams like the Red Sox for a long time, and that, you know, the melodrama, so I don't have to go through it all. But when the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004, it was a big emotional, had a big emotional impact on the whole region, and I can honestly say that it impacted my patients a lot. And a way of encapsulating that was that it was the most powerful antidepressant on the market, was for people to get excited about a successful sports team. And there was something about that whole process that was really interesting. At the same time, the place that I was working, Spaulding Rehab Hospital, shut down their inpatient pain management program, and that's where I had been spending most of my time. This was 2005. It was after the It was after the World Series. So I had to, kind of reorganize my professional life. I ended up moving to the outpatient program, but I decided to take some time off, and in that time off, I did some writing about energy medicine because I wanted to make some sense of my thoughts and interesting ideas. And what happened was that the case examples that I was giving all related to the Red Sox in sports, and I realized that there was a very interesting theme or parallel here. So I wrote it up. Wasn't sure what form it would take, and a friend advised to try for an op-ed in the newspaper. It was sort of short enough that it's manageable. This was September of the following year, 2005. The team was doing very poorly, so the key was a catchy title, I think. I put it together and called it, "Can Weird Signs Save the Sox?" And it was about the intangibles and some of the new research in consciousness and spirituality that might have a practical implication. So it appeared in the Globe. I thought this was that highlighted my career, and it was fun. And that was that. But I have a cousin who's been aware of this project, who actually taught me how to meditate before medical school. He called me a couple of days later, and he said, "Hey, Ricky, what are you doing on Saturday?" And I said, "I don't know. Well, what are you doing?" And he said, "We're going to Fenway Park to film our documentary." And I said, "What documentary?" Because he had called the Red Sox front office and said, the day after it appeared in the paper, "Did you see that article in the paper?" They said yes. And just on the spur of the moment, he said, "Well, we're making a documentary film on that, and we'd like to come to Fenway and film some." So he kind of bluffed his way into that. We got press passes and went to Fenway on Saturday, and it was the beginning of this whole other project, making a documentary film about the Red Sox, but more importantly about these intangible forces that everybody experiences, everybody knows about, but it's really hard to put your finger on, which is why they call it tangible. And that was 6+ years ago. The movie is just about done, and we're starting to find ways to put it out there. But there are a lot of different applications, including situations like this. So what I've done for today's talk is pick out some of the themes that the movie's research touches on in a way that I hope will be relevant to you folks in the contemplative studies program. So let's see if I can help you with. And the talk is informal, so if something can just go like that. We'll have time at the end for questions. So I understand that this is the treehouse program, and treehouses can be very special places with a collection of energy that is a very unique quality. This is the treehouse that was one of my proudest accomplishments as a father. Those are not all my kids, but it's the neighborhood. So treehouses have a special place in my heart. So it was cool when I found out that was the title of your organization. So collective energies are things that people experience in all sorts of settings, and it can be religious or spiritual, with huge numbers like settings such as this. It can be political, a different kind of tone or vibe, although there was definitely some religious overtones to Obama's inspirational qualities. Can be musical, and I'm not even sure which of these is the most commonly experienced one. So there's classical music, there's rock music, and just in case any of you are wondering, no, that is not me. And then, baseball. This is a place where professional sports, amateur sports, sporting events, that's a setting that most of us have experienced some very intense energies. So really the question was, is that something that can be studied? And this season, this team was the real inspiration for it. And that's the op-ed, and the fact that it had a graphic was really thrilling to me. And what was it, September 2005? Yeah, so most years ago. So weird science is a term that I didn't invent. It's sort of a legacy from the post-war era, where I think largely because of the atomic bomb, people were aware of these very powerful forces that were invisible and nobody really understood them, and were fascinated in a love-hate relationship kind of way. So there's a whole series of comic books with, invisible rays and death beams and anti-gravity, this and that. And the phrase, it's a very evocative phrase because weird evokes the strange quality, the unknown quality, but the science evokes the part that it can be studied, it can be understood. And it's not a new strand in Western civilization. That, for example, this gentleman lived 300 years ago. Franz Mesmer was a physician in Austria, and this was the late 1700s, was when we were just learning about electricity and magnetism, and rocks could have magnetic qualities, and he got intrigued by the notion that human beings could have magnetic qualities, and that's where that whole notion of animal magnetism comes from. That was his work. He, just to show you how medicine has changed, his thesis in graduating, and his was on the influences of the planets on the organs. So it was basically medical astrology, and that was not on the curriculum. But he did some work with the individual people, and you may have heard of the mesmeric passes, where he would move his hands down in order to get people into a trance. And actually, let me just show you one other picture saying a little bit more about him. But he also worked in groups and had very powerful effects when people sat around these wooden containers of water. He had previously magnetized the water with his own charisma, that was the word he used, with his own magnetism. And then people would sit around it and hold metal rods that protruded, and it would cause such strong fluxes of energy that, it would get the vapors and faint and have convulsive spells, and it was extremely dramatic. And this was in Paris, and he became the most sought-after physician of the time, and that caused some political problems. So the AMA equivalent of that era, set up a royal commission to investigate him, and there's a whole politics of how he was literally driven out of town, partly because he was stealing all their patients, but partly because they couldn't figure out how his stuff would actually work. Ironically, now, a couple hundred years later, 200 years later, not 300 years later, there are techniques that, especially among nurses, if any of you have heard of therapeutic touch, it's a non-contact form of treatment in which the nurse moves her hands up and down, away from the body, a foot away, 6 inches away, without physically contacting the body. It's exactly how mesmeric passes were described a couple of hundred years ago. But now that we have research methodologies, it's been documented that there are very significant physical and psychological changes from these movements that can't be explained just by placebo or expectation. That's a whole other branch, a little bit away from the main focus, but if you're interested in that, we can kind of go back to it in the Q&A. So there's been a tradition of weird science way back when, and now we have gizmos. This is Dean Radin. He's the chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences out in California. And actually, this machine here is very similar to this machine here. You can't quite see it, but it's sending out a laser beam, and there's a split beam experiment from physics. What he's doing is testing whether human thought can influence the behavior of the slight beam. So, at one level, temptation is to say he's a crackpot because, his mind is here, the laser beam is here, and there's empty space in between, so how can there be any interaction? Well, this is like a paradigm of the kind of studies that can be done and are being done now to investigate what is the impact of the mind on the world. We used to think of it as objective reality, that we're in here and you guys are all out there. But if this model, as it's looking to be more and more valid, we're all interconnected. We may not see it as tangibly as that, but it's there, and there are multiple ways of tapping into it. So Dean is one of the pioneers of weird science. I've never called him a weird scientist to his face, but actually, I have an opportunity coming up in a couple weeks to meet him, and I might see him again, and I might just bring that on. So, just briefly, the idea of energy has been around for a long time. If you've studied traditional Chinese medicine, you know about Qi and Qigong, Tai Chi, acupuncture, all use that, manipulate that. The prana, yoga. The Western mystical tradition has analogous terms. Animal magnetism. And even Sigmund Freud, his libido was a more sexually charged form of this invisible energy. But now that we have tools, we can study the biomagnetism. I wasn't sure where to put this one, but in Star Wars, when he talks about the Force, all his principles are principles of energy medicine. So Yoda was not only a Jedi master, he was an energy medicine master as well. So just to give you a sense that there is some science behind it, and this is their model of what a human being is. So, I studied anatomy in medical school, and we did acknowledge the blood vessels and bones and muscles, but there's this whole little flowy dimension that's part and parcel of energy medicine, and it may recognize these lines or dots. Those are the acupuncture meridians, the pathways that distribute the energy. There are these primary centers or chakras of energy. And then there's this whole envelope of energy that surrounds us. So there's actually a subtle anatomy of the human body because we don't live in our skin. And it's through these centers that we connect to higher and higher realms of existence. And in fact, the crown center here is of particular importance so that the individual can connect to the universe, to the divine. There's an actual physical location that allows us to do that. And these images are, this is from Catholicism, the Virgin of Guadalupe, and one way of looking at it is that's an energy field diagram. They didn't call it that, but spiritual beings have a certain quality that could be conceptualized and concretized in pictures like this. And what else would be there? They actually studied the halo, the nimbus, different forms of it for different people. Another sense of that glowing quality around a highly evolved being. And not just in Christianity, Tibetan Buddhism, very similar imagery. Hinduism, Islam. So there's something about the notion of this radiant energy that characterizes people in general, and highly evolved or spiritually advanced people have more of that quality. And now we're looking to understand it in sort of our language, which is more scientific. So electromagnetism and the notion of an electromagnetic field surrounding people makes sense. There's all this electrical activity in our nervous system. It turns out that the heart generates the strongest field of any organ in the body. And so the energy field around the heart is one that's easiest to detect. You don't actually need very sophisticated equipment, Gauss meters, to measure something several feet out. So, so a group of researchers in California at the Institute of Heart Math, Mathematics of the Heart, that's where the name comes from, have been doing research for close to 30 years. That's a spin-off of the fact that the heart is not a metronome. It doesn't beat with regularity. And the interval between the beats changes in particular patterns depending on your frame of mind or your emotional state. And it turned out that this is a great avenue that allows us to study the interactions between human beings in their energy field. So just a quick example, this is your heart rate in beats per minute, and you can see when you're frustrated, it's very variable. Sometimes it's low, sometimes it's high, and it just sort of zigzags without any kind of pattern to it. But what they found was that of all the emotions in the human range, if you elicit a feeling of appreciation, it sets up this very rhythmic sinusoidal sine wave pattern where the heart rate varies. The variability is a predictable pattern. And this is the axis. And what they call this a state of heart coherence, because you sort of click into this mode and everything within your system resonates. And the heart sets up a resonance with the nervous system. And when people generate this state, they improve their mind-body coordination. There are a lot of measurements of everything from stress resilience, academic performance, so application in the classroom makes a lot of sense. And even athletic performance, like golfers were able to increase the velocity of their swing by, I've forgotten how many miles per hour, but simply by focusing on that emotion in this area of the body, the heartfelt emotion. So their theory was it sets that electromagnetic field to pulse in a rhythm that's very resonant throughout your system. They proposed that it could influence people around them, but they hadn't really done good studies to prove that. So I was thinking this is a great model for how the fans might use fan energy, or have always used fan energy, to influence their players if they're in a frame of positive affection even. The players get swept up in that, and if fans are in that coherent state, they can even get the players over the hump if the players are nervous or something. So it seemed like a possible mechanism, and I was looking for a way to test it. So what I did was I volunteered to be a guinea pig. I went to the Heart Math Institute, and you can't really see it, but my finger was there's a simple way to measure a pulse. Just the pressure of the pulse in your finger is enough that it can be detected and fed into a computer. And the software converts it into the heart rate variability graphs. But what was different was I was blindfolded and earplugged and in sensory isolation to the room. So the way it was set up, I was just sitting there, I was relaxing, they were measuring what my baseline was, and I was not generating much at all of that coherent pattern. my heart rate slowed down, but it wasn't in that rhythmic pattern that you saw in the earlier graph. And then at some point, unbeknownst to me, these four people entered the room behind me, sat down, and they were heart math practitioners, they call it. So they, at a moment's notice, they can shift into that coherent state. So the experiment kind of literally went like that, which I didn't see. They did their inner emotional shift, and these little gizmos registered that they were in heart coherence, and this little gizmo, or big gizmo, registered what happened to me. And I'll show you. It's a little bit hard to. Basically, this is the key graph. This is the converted data that shows the extent of my coherence, and it wasn't very much before they came in. That's here, so I was sort of sputtering in and out of it. They came in, and literally after 10 or 15 seconds of them being in that mode, my coherence just went up and up and up. You can see it a little bit in the erratic scatter there, and it's a little bit more rhythmic here after that entry point. So the finding here is that I thought I was a separate person, you know, with air in between us, but in fact, their inner emotional state was affecting me, was affecting my physiology, was affecting the way I felt, because there was a kind of a quality of lightness that, you know, it's a little hard to pin down. And presumably, I would have had greater coordination as well, because I was in the zone. Yeah. No.
Well, why the giant spike right around the critical moment?
Well, I think that reflects the fact that you have a research background and you're asking me a very good question. When they came in, I could actually they moved the air and I could feel it. So I kind of shifted because I knew something was happening. I still didn't know how to get into the zone, but as soon as because I had been quote unquote trying beforehand, so that was a flaw in the design. And you know, future rounds of this, there are ways to protect me from the air movement for sure. But even more important, there are ways to screen out electromagnetic influence. What is called a Faraday cage. It's like a copper grid can be put around me, and test the hypothesis that this is transmitted through the electromagnetic field. So this is a very preliminary study with some problems, but it's very suggestive, and that would be the way to go. Yeah.
What is it's like the law of thermodynamics that energy cannot be created or destroyed but can be transferred?
Well, that's an interesting point, because in the sort of energy consciousness model, there's a sense that there are infinite sources of energy that you can draw down and bring into the physical system that weren't there before. So, I'm not sure that this pilot is what helps you conclude about that, but the energy model is very different than the traditional physics model. And there's quantum physics has a lot of overlap to consciousness studies, and some of the folks like Professor William Tiller have kind of expanded basically the model of reality to include these kind of events. So this was very intriguing, and I guess what I would like to do as a practical application is sort of, wouldn't it be cool if at Fenway Park, before the game starts, the Jumbotron or loudspeaker or whoever, it's not that difficult to get into the state. It basically involves remembering some very positive experiences you've had related to this, calling forth the emotion and feeling it, and letting yourself literally focus in here. So whether that's your heart chakra is being activated, whether it's your electromagnetic field being enforced and enhanced. If there were 35,000 people doing that at once, the prediction is that it would have a bigger impact than on any other day when it was sort of a random mixture of cheers and boos. And actually, that's an important point. That some of the physicists that we talked to and the HeartMath people said that it actually destroys the energy field that you're trying to create when you begin to boo the opponent. Obviously, it's a very different emotional tone or quality to cheer versus to boo, but destructive interference is the term that they use to describe it. So it's practical advice that I don't think will go over too well in Boston, because I just enjoy saying Yankees suck, and if somebody says, well, physics proves that, that's not going to that's not going to do it, unfortunately. I actually thought that after we won the World Series, and then after we won the second World Series, we sort of outgrow that, but it's too ingrained.
Yeah. Were you blind to the hypothesis when this experiment was run?
Sorry?
Were you blind to the hypothesis in this experiment?
No, I knew what we were trying to do.
Okay.
And I was actually, encouraged to get as coherent as I could before they came in. I wasn't successful, which I guess meant I was incoherent. But yeah, there are a lot of experimental design issues that we did not fully address. And, that's sort of the purpose of a pilot study like this, is to just see if there's any potential there. And further iterations that would take into account, whether the subject was told what the expectation was, had previous training or did not have training. A lot of variables for sure, but something significant certainly did happen. And just some other research that you may know about in the whole realm of expectation and hope and prayer, that there's actually a fairly large literature now about the role of prayer, the impact of prayer, not just within the practitioner, but its impact on other people. And this is the sort of the abstract of the first one that really got the ball rolling from 1988. I know this is under the umbrella of the theology department, right? Is that correct? Is it? Psychology. Is this a domain that has come up with it? You might be familiar with the effect of prayer on intercessory prayer on other people. Well, this was the first study, and the basic setup was that people in a cardiac unit in San Francisco all went through the standard, medical protocol post heart attack, but half of them were in addition receiving prayer from people in another city on their behalf, and they didn't know which group they were in, whether they were receiving or not, and a whole range of medical variables was followed, and for many of them, to a degree of high statistical significance, there was differences in terms of antibiotics, medications, the need to be on a vent. The people who were prayed for did better. And it was not bedside prayer, which was what made this so challenging. That, in fact, some of the prayer groups were quite distant. So, in medical terms, this data suggests that intercessory prayer to the Judeo-Christian God, beneficial therapeutic effect in patients who don't just see you. They don't mention other kinds of gods. But, so, as you can imagine, it stirred up a lot of controversy. Yeah.
Was there any sort of control for what kind of support the individual patients had outside of the hospital? Like what kind of family and friend situations they were in?
What are you thinking?
If people have a better situation, they're more likely to do better. So. Right.
So there are a lot of variables that influence how people do in their hospital stay, and social support is certainly one of them. Another is whether they're already involved in any kind of prayer group in their own community, and that's actually become one of the issues. Is you can't ask people to stop praying because your loved one is part of a medical experiment. So it's very hard. Again, it's very hard to adequately address all these variables. A study out of Boston a few years ago tried to do that. It's Herbert Benson, who's probably best known for the relaxation response, which is sort of I guess you would say a secular form of meditation. He had a multi-site. He's got 6 hospitals. Did something similar with intercessory prayer, and some knew and some didn't know. And this was already 5 years ago, but this one got a lot of publicity because the bottom line was negative findings that the prayer group did not do better, and in fact the group that was told they were going to be prayed for did worse. Very slight. I mean, it wasn't like dropping like flies or anything. But, so this has gotten far more publicity in the mainstream media than the previous one or any of the other subsequent ones that validate it. So it sort of raised the question, well, what do you believe? And what's really going on here? And the devil is in the details, as they say. And it was really interesting to some of the critics of Benson looked at the intervention. And the key part was that the intercessors, the prayers, added a phrase. They would pray for successful surgery with quick, healthy recovery and no complication to their usual prayers. It looks relatively benign, and yeah, you might as well put that in if that's what you're hoping for. But it totally skews the mechanics of prayer in that many of these groups were doing more open-ended prayers that thy will be done. And while you're at it, I want you no complications from it. So you can see that there's a very different tone involved in adding specific requests. So some of the critics of Benson have said that it's actually an invalid intervention because the prayer was not designed for most effectiveness because the prayers don't really know what the best outcome is. And so even though Benson is Dr. Benson's a very highly respected person, there are some nuances that he's overlooked. It just shows some of the challenges of prayer research. One of the people we interviewed for the movie was Dr. Larry Dawsey. He's a Texas physician who's done work on mind-body medicine and non-local medicine, the idea that actions can be in existence. And he had a very interesting comment about, he was the one who told me about this glitch, but his critique was he comes from a Texas Baptist background. He said, well, maybe those Harvard boys don't know how to pray. He was right. He was right. So a lot of nuances to it. So it's one thing to do. Okay, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go.
That was just what I was thinking about. I mean, was there anything mentioned? How much did they really believe in their prayers? Both the people, the sick people and those who were praying, or they were just saying the words?
Great point, because as you can imagine, if you're just reading a script and your heart's not in it, whatever the energy isn't going to be there. So it wasn't studied, but the people who volunteered to do the praying, they were already members of active prayer groups. So it was, their calling, or it was what they loved to do.
How about the patients?
Right. That's not known. Their degree of belief in the potential efficacy, and that's really a whole. Just as an aside, that's an important piece in all medical research. It's not usually assessed. Do the patients believe that this new intervention is likely to help them or not? Because as we're learning more and more about the power of the placebo effect, that it's hugely powerful and not something that I just dismiss and say, oh, that's just the placebo effect, doesn't really work. Anything that can activate the placebo effect has tremendous healing potential. So, if prayer is just the placebo effect, fantastic. It activates whatever the healing mechanisms might be that are inherent. So, yeah, by all means. It was one thing to do a study in the laboratory, but we wanted to see what happened out there in the real world. Yes, go ahead.
Just about the prayer studies, you mentioned that there have been a number of intercessory prayer studies. Has there been a kind of a meta-analysis looking at,
Yeah, it's very interesting. It depends who does the meta-analysis. We like to think of science as objective, but in an area like this, people have access to grind, and they can use statistics to grind one way or the other. And so it's really interesting because there's a lot at stake in a study like if that's true, that distant prayer can affect someone 1,000 miles away, then really all our models of reality are either wrong or inadequate. And it pulls the rug out from this university, that we've built our whole, not to get too melodramatic, we built our whole civilization on the notion that, I'm a bundle of water and molecules here, and you're over there, and there's air molecules, and our consciousness happens because we have so many neurons rubbing against each other and sparking the fire. I don't even know how that's supposed to happen. So this suggests that there's a whole other level of process or force involved that we are totally ignoring. And so a lot of people are threatened by new information that's so profoundly different than what they're used to. So it's not easy to say, well, I did a study and here's the results and now go change your way of life to accommodate what I found. And so there's a tremendous backlash. It's really interesting to read the literature. I'm not expert in it. Dr. Dossi is. He's someone who I respect. He's the editor of a journal called Explore, the Journal of Health and Consciousness. And he writes sort of an editorial commentary every 2 months. And he's just got a big vision. And so he'll pick a contemporary topic and talk about his take on it from the view of new consciousness. And a lot of it's online. And actually, when I talk about the methodology here, he has a really good summary of that as well. Any other comments on that? Do you want to ask them?
I guess because people create differently, so they have to, when they created their thoughts, emotion, and action have to line up.
Right. So you're really asking, how do we know they're praying correctly, effectively? It's a great question, and there's so many different ways it can go. One of the, since I'm approaching this from the perspective of my favorite sports team, you gotta wonder, is Jewish prayer more effective than Buddhist prayer, more effective than, you can have a prayer religious or something like that. But, right, just saying that already puts my ego's wishes as the motivator rather than saying, I'm just gonna open it up to something bigger than me. So it's very challenging and tricky to work with this kind of system. Yeah. So this is a picture of a laptop computer in the when the camera this is at Fenway Park. And really what I had was the opportunity to use a novel technology to measure the vibe in a big area like Fenway. It's totally different than the heart rhythm thing. I'm hesitating because I don't totally believe it, I guess, but a computer can generate a string of random numbers, like flipping a coin electronically thousands of times per second, ones and zeros, based on the sort of the background noise electronically. And normally it's 50-50 ones and zeros with a lot of fluctuations. And what the Princeton group found is that if people meditate at the computer, basically, intend to shift more towards ones or more towards zeros, the distribution of those numbers shifts in statistically significant amounts, to statistically significant degrees. And obviously that's that's impossible kind of conclusion. And they face a lot of flack, refine their methodology, and replicate it again and again and again and again.
So this is based off the Princeton Egg Project, is that? Okay. You can say they generate real random numbers electrically, so.
Right, that's right. So Princeton has the engineering anomalies research lab, the PAIR lab, and then they have these mobile units called eggs or regs or random event generators. And they take them around the world and study how it responds to events and have some very dramatic findings. So we went to Fenway with one and basically had it running while the game was going on. You can't read from the screen what it's finding, how random or non-random things have become. But I was writing down, at 8:25, David Ortiz hit a home run. The crowd was really, really into it because the allegation was that focused attention from a lot of people can be measured. And so this is the result at the end of the game. It looks pretty random. This is 2 standard deviations, and you can see that there's a few moments when it went quite above and quite a bit below. The interesting thing is that those moments happen much more than you would expect by a random distribution, and they happened when I had identified key game events. So one of the big ones was when the crowd did the wave, and everybody So it's a rhythmic movement that people get their whole kind of body into, their whole energy field that you wish into. And they were teachers of that. And the biggest one was a sing-along, the Sweet Caroline sing-along. Now the computer didn't have microphone, didn't have electrodes, didn't have a vibration meter. So somehow the combined collective consciousness of that group of 35,000 people was influencing what some people are calling the quantum level of reality, and the computer was registering, was picking up on it. So, you know, I sort of believed it at one level, but to have it actually happen has been a challenge. So I've written it up. The other paper and this paper are both available. You can download and review the whole document at my website. And again, there's a lot of methodology problems, which you might be raising your hand to point out. You're right, but it at least suggests that there's ways of even large groups having measurable influence on each other and on you know, a neutral detection device. Good.
Yeah, I just have a question about the instruments used to measure this. Were they all made in like the same lab at Princeton, or have they been made in separate places by separate people?
It's not actually a piece of equipment, it's a software program.
Okay.
That every electronic equipment generates its own internal noise, static, you could think of it as static. And so the software converts that background hum into ones and zeros. So it's not that it was imprinted by the designer or something like that. It's been
And it's
tested.
used on different operating systems and different.
Yes, right. Well, no, they haven't made a Mac one. I had to get a PC, but that's a PC and that's not a Mac. But, right.
We have a couple questions. One is, do you know if the actual mean at the end of the day was statistically significant, like away from where it should have been? Because what you have in the y-axis, that's crowd focus, that's coin flips, basically, right?
Well, right. Zero is as many heads as tails, or as many ones as zeros.
Right.
But there were a lot that deviated in the negative direction and the positive end. We don't know the significance of that.
But I mean, like the overall mean was that statistically out from the expected zero count?
I don't know. Now, in the Princeton experiments, they track a collective rather than moment by moment. So theirs will rise steadily above,
Right.
Steadily above, more and more above.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if you had computed that.
In this 2-hour interval, we haven't. That's a really good question. Because, again, we don't know whether the ones or zeros have different emotional valence. And again, that would be very interesting to study. So, I mean, it was very cool that it detected something during the game. But what makes it more relevant, even more relevant to your study, is on a whim, not on a total whim, but because there was a precedent, we decided to do some measurements even when nobody was there. So this was a few hours before the game, as you can see, memory was empty. And we had the computer doing that same, spitting out the ones and zeros, and got some results. And then we also did it in the off season, when nobody was coming in a couple of hours, nobody had been there for a month. And I mean, the hypothesis was kind of nuts that Fenway Park can store energy. And even when nobody's there, there's something beyond just a background buzz or background noise. And that as well, here's the. We only made short measurements. These were only for 20 minutes or so, and we were looking for large fluctuations over 3 standard deviations, weighted average, or not quite so large fluctuations, and found that the off-season level was the lowest, pre-game was higher, mid-game was highest, and other settings with lots of people around had sort of the same level as an empty but preparatory Fenway Park. So again, these numbers wouldn't stand up in any kind of journal for scrutiny, but they trend in the direction that suggests that Fenway Park is somehow a receptacle for energy that stays even when the people aren't there. And that directly correlates to the notion of conditioned spaces that physicist William Tiller has researched, I think. I do, actually. So, a physicist who has done experiments in group meditation where they'll have a laboratory set up that's only used to meditate in. And they keep meditating on a regular basis for, I think it's actually been years now, to see what effect that has on the physical characteristics of the room. And this particular one, they studied pH change findings. And it's really as simple as putting this water, you know what the pH of water is, 7.0, put it in the room and leave it, and I forget now whether it's overnight or an hour, it shifts by as much as one whole pH unit in that conditioned space, but not in other, identical barometric temperature conditions, whatever. So the notion is that repeated human activity, mental activity, not physical activity, can alter the physical parameters of a setting. And this is published in it's not a mainstream journal. It's the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, but they've done really high quality vetting and peer review of some of these controversial studies. So it's not yet appeared in Nature or New England Journal of Medicine, but been repeated enough times that there's definitely something to it. So what this lab has wondered is, if you have a place where people have been praying, not just people, thousands of people, wholehearted devotion for years and years and years and years, will that condition the space around words? Will it change the physical properties? Is it possible that an ailing person who walks into that environment can be affected by there? In addition to whatever internal placebo prayer quality within themselves, is there some characteristic that actually has that kind of impact? So there are sacred sites around the world, and in all traditions. The Princeton group went to Egypt. They went to the Great Pyramid and King's Chamber, Pyramid of Cheops, and did their random number generator type measurements and found highly significant, I don't even remember how many zeros, p less than, with basically, essentially this setup in that empty room. So, and some of the ancient sites have that sort of quality too. I mean, probably all, I don't know if this is too personal a question, but can you identify a place that you've been that has a quality of specialness that you can't quite put your finger on?
Where I practice yoga in South Boston Yoga.
In the studio?
In the studio, okay. Yeah. And people have said they can be so, and I felt it. I can go and be so stressed out getting my parking space or whatever.
Right.
And when I walk in, I can feel the shift in my body energy. And then during the class, if you just get pulled in and transformed from that collective breath and energy.
Right. Yeah. Are there other favorite places that you want to mention? Fenway Park for anybody? Or Marsh Chapel? There's some places of worship in Boston that are quite like this is one that for me, and I had the opportunity to go a couple of times to Stonehenge. My wife is British, so we visited England a fair amount of times. And being at Stonehenge had that same quality, and certainly it's like very hard to cognitively figure it all out. So there's that part of just mystery, whatever that sense is. But there's also a special quality. Have any of you ever been to Stonehenge? It's very large, right? So you know that I don't know the dimensions, but personally, like about that big size. It's very big, and that makes it all the more unusual that a couple of years ago, it's in the plains of southwest of England, And it's just wheat fields for acres and acres all around. So a couple of years ago, some interesting things started happening to the wheat in the fields nearby. And the next slide is an aerial view with Stonehenge at the top. This is Stonehenge. This is the wheat field across the street. The individual stalks of wheat overnight were found to have been moved to a horizontal position in this extremely complex, extremely beautiful. It's actually a logarithmic spiral of mathematical precision. It's one of the, you've heard of the term crop circles. And so crop circles are sort of a new version of a sacred space in the sense that people have really begun to explore what happens there. At a recent, it was 3 or 4 years ago when my wife and I went, we went to that region hoping to see something because it's very random when one happens and they don't last for very long because the farmers don't want to lose that much acreage just for some, tourists. They're hole-punching hippie tourists. So they don't last long, so these aerial flyovers to record are really important. Well, we happened to be to time it really well, and there was a crop circle near where we were staying. So I had a chance to sit in it to kind of feel what it might be. So I can tell you my subjective experience was that the place felt qualitatively different. I mean, obviously part of my mind was thinking, wow, this is really cool, and those sort of things. But I have enough meditation experience that I sort of know how long it takes to get into a certain kind of feeling of alignment. And this was way quicker. So I'm not putting this out even as a study, but just as a suggestion that there are many different types of conditioned spaces, sacred spaces. Human activity can create them. I have no idea whose activity created this. I'm not even sure it was human, but that you can find it in natural settings, in man-made settings, and in other settings as well. So I use that as an example of showing that there's a lot of unusual things going on. Just to summarize, this is actually one of the points in the movie is to train fans to be energetically effective. That fans have a responsibility, not just watching, you're creating the energetic environment that your players are performing in. So a lot of it has to do with balancing body energy systems. I mean, the ideal thing would be for fans to get acupuncture treatment or something before the game, but that's not really practical. So there are ways that you can, this whole branch of energy medicine or energy psychology, if people have an interest in that, we got to talk about it, it's just fascinating, but there are some simple ways to clear beliefs that, like, for example, if you think, and they're never going to win, this pitcher owns them. You can, just saying that, just thinking that, you can feel how it contracts you a little bit. So as a player, obviously, you don't want to be in that contracted state. They're taking care of that in their own way. As a fan, if you want to maximize your energy, you have to find some way to put those down to side. And there are some simple kind of affirmation, meridian tapping approaches that can help you do that. And basically focus on positive emotions, appreciation, love, aligning with your heart. And there's ways of projecting energy and seeing what it says to the players. So I think one of the coolest outcomes of the project would be to find some way to get large-scale participation in fan energy experiments. It hasn't happened yet, but players are starting to embrace it. Actually, not in Boston. There's one Boston player who uses these energy tapping techniques, but St. Louis Cardinals, and if you're baseball fans, you know that they kind of had a very surprising change of fate midway through last season and went on to win the World Series. And commentators talked about the harmony and the cohesion and all these wonderful qualities. They had recently started working with a sports psychologist who uses these energy-based approaches, and the players loved it. They didn't work with the fans, but the players were getting their energies in alignment so that they could put themselves into the zone, and it had very dramatic results. So I think sports can be sort of the vehicle for bringing some of these ideas into the mainstream. I'm doing it through the movie medium of cinema. And if you're interested in learning more, that's the website that it's a fantastic website. Adam is the master. And, there's a lot of, you can access some of the papers that I talked about. You can view the trailer. You can actually watch the trailer if you would like, and learn more about how things are going with the project. Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to know of the study and know of those tips that you put on the last slide, because for one thing, it means that all those years in my childhood of wishing the Houston Rockets, sort of, praying over them and all that kind of stuff was not, wasted.
It was not in vain. It was not in vain. You may not get a letter of thank you from Rudy Tomjanovich or whoever was your player of choice, but yeah.
You didn't talk that much about the content of the op-ed, and I'm wondering, I remember years ago just reading a random op-ed about the Red Sox, basically coaching Red Sox fans to not be so pessimistic, because it actually has this effect on the team. Was that you, or was it?
It could have been. I mean, I focus more on some of the distant prayer part, the fact that water molecules can be influenced by intention in the lab, and people are 65% water molecules. There were 4 or 5 main points, but the pessimism was so entrenched in Boston that it's almost like we enjoyed and lost again kind of thing. So it took the near miss in 2003 for us to think, wow, this might be possible. And that really changed the psychology, and I think it changed the energetics of the fan base and the players. Of course, obviously, if you have a team where the players are just not very competent, it doesn't matter how phenomenally devoted the fans are. And then likewise, if you have an excellent team, well, that would be an interesting experiment. You've got a really skilled team, and the fans, for whatever reason, could care less. How much would that undermine them? So it's an intangible that if everything else is equal, might make the difference. It's not the be-all and end-all. And in fact, in the movie, I had a chance to interview Theo Epstein before he started, and I was asking him how important is chemistry, and he said, if all you got going for your team is chemistry, you're in big trouble. That it takes a certain basic skill level.
That's what you would expect from a general manager.
Well, the way that 2014 had such quirky people that worked so well together, you wondered whether that was their focus was on chemistry, and it wasn't. I mean, Theo's such a numbers guy. He really acknowledges that chemistry exists. I should say he's physics. Chemistry is too intangible.
Which raises an interesting point in terms of the whole Joy of Sox movie, the fact with all the changes that are happening, with the management and everything within the Red Sox. Are you going to continue this, or, where are you at in all of that?
Never-ending saga. Well, actually, because of how the season fell apart at the end of last year, it was like a great example of what happens if you have bad chemistry, and if the intangibles are totally gone. So we're going to find a way to edit in a short segment highlighting their demise last year, because the Globe had a series of articles with all these really provocative headlines about Red Sox failed chemistry and beer drinking in the locker room and things like that. So kind of make a montage of headlines and some voiceover. So it's not included in the movie, but these themes are occurring all the time, and I comment sometimes on the website or if you want to be Facebook friends to the website, just noticing different group energy type of impacts in society and sports, because it's a really powerful lens to look at large events and reading them. And certainly now, society is sort of so much turmoil and unpredictability. Well, if there was a way to have a coherent group intention for a positive outcome, what would that do? But in fact, the HeartMath people have yeah, this is worth mentioning, the Global Coherence Initiative. And that's another website where they're basically encouraging people around the world to be appreciative, get their heart rhythms in that coherent state, set up the electromagnetic field. It's really to influence the electromagnetic field of the Earth in a way that people are aligned for some of the positive main goals that everybody is wanting to achieve.
I have a couple of questions about, I think it was about halfway through the slide that described I think that it was the number of statistical deviations in the random generator program per category of time. Was that what it was? So that, for example, during the middle of an intense game, there was something like 150 standard, or times when the balance was either 1 or 2 standard deviations above or below the mean.
Gotcha.
Is that what it was? Is that what that was describing?
It was an invented weighted averaging system to try and highlight the difference. It's not a validated measure, but we want to see how often they had big spikes.
Right.
In this setting compared to that setting compared to this setting, and so that was the way that we were able to highlight it. I mean, if we were going to do more comparison studies, we need to really refine that, but that's the gist of it, yeah.
Right. So I was wondering, just kind of, what would keep? I mean, what would keep you from just doing that same measurement between a mid-game scenario and an off-season, middle of the afternoon, nothing going on scenario, 100 or 200 or 300 times to build up that kind of statistical power?
That's the goal. I would love to do that. Yes, right. Because it's just a one-shot deal, and 20 minutes is not going to be as significant as doing it every day. I mean, that would be the ideal thing, every day for a year.
Mm-hmm.
What's the average randomness or coherence on that particular day? And, my prediction would be that it would rise during the course of the season and settle down at the end, but not go to zero. I don't know what we would measure as our comparison for zero, like a parking lot across the street or something, something where it's not a group focused attention. So another way of answering that is to refer to the Global Consciousness Project. They're the ones that have these units distributed around the world, continuously monitoring world events. And there's just it's like, an EEG of the Earth or of humanity. And there are times during large, compelling group events where the computers around the world are measuring that something is happening. I think Princess Di's funeral was one of the first ones that really any guesses as to what the biggest collective spike was in the last 10 or 12 years?
Tsunami.
No, it was actually 9/11.
In the PAIR project?
Yeah. No, the GCP. Well, yeah. What did you say?
I thought it was the tsunami that beat out 9/11.
I don't think so, but
okay.
Depends who's keeping score, right? But tsunami's another good example. That's an event that impacted a lot of people and that a lot of people became aware of. And there's something about shared attention and intention that's really important. Julian?
I was just going to say something about the Sox winning the championship that year. I think that coincides also with the them changing their policy of how they recruit players based on the success of a team that in previous year, a couple of years before, if I'm not mistaken, adapted. There's a movie with Brad Pitt in it that I recently watched.
Right.
I'm not a baseball fan, so I can't really bring up the names. Right. But according to the movie, one of the reasons that the team was so successful was actually the way that they used statistics was very different.
That's right. So that's Moneyball is the movie that you're
right.
referring to. Right. And there is a whole school of statistical analysis that came to the Sox around that same time, and they would draft players because of the configuration of Fenway Park that would suit their hitting style, for example. So clearly that's a factor, but also this is another factor. So, how do you do a controlled experiment in a social, institutional setting like that? I don't really know, except doing repeated measurements. And so, some of the folks at Fenway, the central office, know about this and have actually been very supportive. So it's kind of on my wish list to put it to them to support, gathering a lot more data and seeing. Look, were we just lucky that day that we went to that game? It wasn't that extraordinary game. The Sox actually lost, but so yeah, I mean that's a good question. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little more on how this random generator machine actually works? And I know you explained it a little bit.
I got a better idea. I can't explain very well the algorithms that analyze the random data, but if you go to the website, because this is a proprietary version, it wasn't the first version, Psygenics, PSIGENICS, you can download a free, I think it's like a 30-day trial of psycho-responsive software. And what that will do is put up on your screen an image of a yellow ball, and with your intention, you direct the ball to either rotate away from you or towards you, and it keeps score. And so, and on the website, a lot of the research is you can read the PDFs of how we set up the algorithm, what the software looks like, and computer modeling, how that references to other number generators. So it's kind of above my pay grade, but it's out there for.
And it's the same machine that you use?
Yes. It's actually not the machine, against the software.
Okay.
Any computer can download the software and use it. Just want to say that the movie isn't yet out. It's like 99.5% complete. But there's a companion book that, if you're interested, I have some copies here for sale. And if you'd like to follow the project and participate in the project, you can either sign up through the website or they put out a little sign-up sheet as well. And again, Facebook is one of the ways that you younger folks nowadays keep up to date on stuff like that. So that's another option too. Yeah.
So I'm really interested in this research that you're doing, and just to sort of like structure in my mind how I might do future experiments along the same line. A couple questions about the methodology. With the game that you measured, I remember you said that you wrote down like when Ortiz hit a home run or something like that. Were all of the circled events that you came up with things that you'd written down ahead of time? Every one of them?
I wrote down about 20 events during the game, and I had, I think, 6 that were extremely obviously important, 10 that were pretty important, and some were so-so. I forget the numbers right now, but so the gist of it was. And of those, the highest spiked ones, of the 6 highest spikes, 5 were ones that I hit in my highest spike. The paper has the exact numbers. It has the correlation analysis to see how significant it was. But this was just my subjective. So
some of the circles weren't things that you'd written down ahead of time?
No, the circles were. What was it? Correct.
And like, what keeps you up at night about the possible, biases in the data, basically?
Well, both of the papers address that. There's a very long section.
And that's on. I can get those on the website.
Both of them you can download on the website.
Okay.
Like the one in the laboratory, I think you guys touched on a lot of the issues, and you can sort of tease it out pretty well. I'd really like to see if the electromagnetic field is the carrier of this impact or not, because it makes a nice model. But there have been other studies where the non-local factors are what mediate it. Like prayer studies, for example. And so there's a possibility that it's not even, the electromagnetic forces that are relevant. That, the language is sometimes used as that consciousness is not bound by the space-time continuum. And this may be the mechanism that steps out of it and then emerges back into it in order to have its impact. And of course, that's challenging to study as well.
So is your working model as you go through day to day and do these things that the electromagnetic spectrum is the carrier of these phenomena as you? That's your sort of.
No, you're asking me to commit here. I think the electromagnetic spectrum is like the final pathway by which consciousness exerts its effect on the physical world. But I don't think consciousness is reducible to electromagnetism. I think there's people are multidimensional. We have our, physical part. I think there's an energy body. Some of those diagrams pointed out. The acupuncture meridians are part of it. The energy centers are part of it. But there's subtler and subtler levels of that energy. There's, if you call it, higher vibrations. And I think our core consciousness is not generated by physical, but it uses the physical to kind of act in the world. And so our awareness can step out of the physical, perhaps even interact with other awarenesses, and then have an impact as a sort of, you could say, trickle-down effect that trickles down through electromagnetic into physiology and into behavior in the world.
Can I follow up on that? So I don't know if have you read much into the history of the vitalistic hypothesis in physiology in the 19th. I would wonder if somebody like Claude Bernard were here right now who claimed to measure the energy input into an organism and then actually apply the law of the conservation of energy to all physiological activities. What would you say to him? Because his argument would be, well, listen, you can't. There's no room for chi. There's no room for any extra energy because I've shown that whatever you put into the body is the amount of energy that you get through heat, motion, digestion, right?
Right. So that's testable because you could have like an energy healer. I mean, let's say I'm an energy healer. I could be sitting here doing, there's qigong actually. There's external qigong at a distance where I could literally be doing that and adding what I consider to be energy to your system that isn't physical or biochemical. It's not measurable by metabolic studies, and yet you would be outputting more than could be accounted for by how much you breathe and things like that. So I'm not aware of anybody who's studied it at that level. It's most of the studies are looking for ways to show its impact on the physical world. There's research on energy healers. There's research on spirits and mediums and things that you would think are not amenable to scientific research. But another of the groups, the organizations, is the acronym is ISSSEEM. It's the people I don't know. It's great. It's the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energy and Energy Medicine. And these are basically gizmo guys who want to try and measure anything. And so that's what they're doing. And some very intriguing stuff. Yeah, John.
So many years ago when I was an undergrad here, I took a class in basically weird science, taught by a great guy named Tony Barron. And we did dowsing rods, tarot cards, energy stuff, all this stuff. And I'm not going to say that I was sort of on board with everything, but I came away with sort of a changed perspective on a few things. It was very interesting. So I guess my question to you is, you've expressed some skepticism during your talk. I guess, how does it break down for you? How much of this, do you really think there's something real there versus how much do you think is kind of wobbly?
I am a believer, and that's based on personal experiences over many years. I found that personal experiences are more compelling than double-blind research studies. Studies are great, and just one really important one, because most of my experience have been with energy healing, where people put their hands on you or put their hands near you, and claim to manipulate what's going on, and you can feel stuff that's not just from a 98.6 degree temperature warm. But one study, for example, was in cell cultures. The non-contact therapeutic touch of cell growth in a test tube, basically. So there's no placebo effect, there's no expectancy, it's not the personal relationship between a practitioner in the cell, and found that when they were doing the true therapeutic touch compared to the just going through the motions therapeutic touch, a huge difference in cell growth rates. So that actually is, for me, a very compelling study. So even if I'd never experienced therapeutic touch, that would catch my attention. I would say, I mean, there are places where I draw the line. Astrology, I just don't never gotten, convinced me. But some of the energy manipulation techniques are, I get regular treatments, so that says something too. And I think some of these other things, like, the crop circle phenomenon for me was another eye opener, because I can't figure it out and explain it by the normal models. They are real. The media is a really important factor here, because ask kind of people on the street about crop circles, and many of them will say, "Oh, wasn't that those two farmers who used a plank of wood to, flatten the wheat?" And that's what the first wave of media coverage was. These two guys claimed to have done it, but that was back in the day when crop circles were just basically circles. They're so complicated now that it would take 20 people, a week to do something like that, and there'd be footprints and artifacts, and people would see it. I don't know if you noticed, but in Stonehenge there was a pretty major road right between Stonehenge and the crop circle. So something very, very different is going on, and maybe we'll find out in was it December 20th, 2012. Answers to that. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about effective ways of creating this kind of energy coherence? For example, the four individuals who were in the study at IONS.
Well,
and also, do you put any of this into practice in your own medical practice in some way?
I mean, there are a lot of approaches that focus on energy balancing. So it can be anything from Tai Chi, for example, it's a movement form that works with the energy circulating. It's kind of like acupuncture through movement. Meditation in general allows the balances to kind of settle out, because it takes a certain amount of mental energy to sustain them as they are, whether it's through your beliefs and perceptions or memories. So if you can step back in a meditative way, it sort of normalizes. The energy psychology approach, if you look at the organization ACEP, Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, they talk about many of the techniques where you literally tap on your own meridian points to clear up imbalances. The heart math one, you can go to their website. It's the simplest and it's the most direct. You can put your hand on your heart if you want, because the warmth of your hand helps sort of remind and activate you. But just feeling appreciative. It's not even a technique. It's the way of being, and it has a profound impact on your energy state. So, if we had an aura meter or a psychic, clairvoyant, your energy field would grow and get more coherent just by shifting to, worrying about if you're going to get your paper done on time for the end of the semester, versus saying, "Oh, I really appreciate the chance to sunset today." I mean, that's an energy balancing technique right there. So, why don't we stop now? I mean, I'll linger for people who want to know something. People have to move on, but I just want to thank you for your attention and attention.